Intolerance and Discrimination against Christians in Europe to us. So a warm welcome to you, Mrs. Tang Hofman. I would also like to warmly welcome Alessandro Calcagno, who is a legal advisor for Comece, the Commission of Bishops' Conferences of the European Union, and who has extensive experience on this issue of anti-Christian hatred. So welcome, Mr. Calcagno. And we have also several MEPs. Welcome. Mr. Carlo Fidanza will also share some opening remarks with us, and also colleague Paolo Insalvini, both member of the Intergroup. Paolo Fidanza is vice chair also of our Intergroup. Both are also from the ECR, and both are coming from Italy. Yeah. Welcome both, and all our colleagues, and welcome to you all. This conference is made possible by my European political family, the European Christian Political Party. President Mr. Galizzi is with us today. A warm welcome to you. Before I give the floor to our colleague Insalvini, I would like to highlight why it is so important that we discuss and combat violence against Christians and hatred against Christians in the European Union. The European Union was founded on Christian values. Christianity is firmly rooted in all EU countries, but now, unfortunately, we see a rise of incidents, violence, and discrimination against Christians. A phenomenon which remains, in our view, which remains widely ignored, both by national and European authorities. This violence and hatred leads to marginalization and affects also the daily life of Christians in Europe. When it comes to employment, for example, or education, or public expression, and the role of the church in the society. Self-censorship is very common now. Many Christians are afraid to express their religious views in the workplace or at university, for example. So for us, it's clear we have to act now, and we have to counter these developments. Before we are going to listen to our keynote speaker, I would like, first of all, to give the floor to my colleagues. First to our colleague Paolo Insalvini. May I give you the floor, Paola?
Thank you. Thank you very much to Bertian. Thank you to all for organizing this event. And thank you very much, Miriam, for your work and for work with OIDAC Europe. And thank you, Anya, in particular, for presenting this important work and report. I believe we always speak about Christians that are persecuted in the world, especially in Middle East or Africa, in particular in this moment in Nigeria, Mozambique, and other part of Africa. And I personally stayed last month in Lebanon, where in the south, Christians are in the middle of the war between Hezbollah and Israel. And I think it's very important to denounce all this persecution. Also because one of our mission here in the European Parliament is to defend the Christian values, Christian identity, and Christian roots. But I think that for this reason, it's really important also to preserve our freedom here in Europe, because many Christians are facing growing intolerance. Churches are damaged, priests attacked, and people treated differently just because they show their faith. Events that are becoming more common, and they should worry all of us. Italy also is not immune, like all the Europe. We have had cases where Christians were hurt or threatened. In Perugia, for example, recently, a young man who became Christian were attacked because of his conversion. There are also been acts of vandalism against churches and crosses. And also here in the European Parliament, the members who try to defend Christian values and Christian identity are discriminated in a lot of cases, also in the plenary. And this fact shows that discrimination against Christians is present and cannot be underestimated. At the same time, as we all know, Italy also shows that good cooperation between authorities and religious communities can help to protect believers and reduce tensions. When institutions take these issues seriously, things improve. But is Europe taking it seriously? I think not. I believe not. We know that a EU special envoy on freedom of religion or belief has not yet been nominated from the European Commission. We know we don't still have a coordinator for Christianophobia, but we have it for the discrimination against Muslim or for anti-Semitic discrimination. It's all right, but we know that we need a coordinator also for Christianophobia. And for this reason, me and other colleagues, with my colleague Laurence Trochu, we are doing a signature collection to have it finally. And we are starting with it on the December in the next week. My message for this reason today is simple. Freedom of religion means the freedom to live your faith openly and peacefully. In particular, here in Europe for Christians. People should be free to wear a cross, enter a church, pray quietly, pray in public spaces, or speak about their beliefs. Also in our values, and also when we speak about public law. Without fear, without shame, and without being treated as a problem. And so, thank you very much for the work of OIDAC Europe that helps us to understand what is happening. It reminds us that protecting Christians is not about a privilege, but is about basic human rights and the dignity of every person. And so, thank you very much, very much. And we have to fight every day here in European Parliament and in our country. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for your very clear message. And our next speaker is Carlo Fidanza. May you give to the floor.
Thank you, Bertrand, for this occasion, and thank you for your unwavering commitment on this topic and many other topics, but this particularly. And thank you for being here, and thank you to OIDAC Europe and to the director, Madame Tang-Hoffman, for this valuable report. We are really eager to know from you the details of the report. We read something already in the press agencies, very interesting. We rightly follow, as Paolo mentioned, with concern the persecution of Christians around the world. But we cannot overlook what is happening here in Europe, where we see growing hostility, vandalism, desecrations, assaults, and cultural or legal pressures that limit the presence of Christians in public life. At the same time, we must acknowledge a real gap in institutional monitoring. The FRA, the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, has long-standing systems to track anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, yet not comparable monitoring exists for hatred against Christians. This makes the work of civil society organizations like OIDAC all the more important, because without systemic data, part of this phenomenon risks remaining overlooked and insufficiently addressed. The report also highlights a rise in legal and regulatory restrictions, from investigations for silent prayer to limits on public expression of faith. These trends challenge the consistency of our democratic principles. The relevance of this issue is captured in the words of John Paul II at the United Nations in 1995. Religious freedom is, in a certain sense, the foundation of every other freedom. And in his appeal, John Paul II, to Europe at Santiago de Compostela, old Europe, find yourself again, revive your roots. So religious freedom is part of who we are. Christian roots is part of who we are. And they must be safeguarded so that every believer and every Christian can live and express their faith without fear. So thank you again to OIDAC Europe, thank you Bertian, and thank you all for being here. Our Forbes Intergroup knows what is at stake and will continue to make its voice heard so that these challenges receive the institutional attention they require. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Carlo, and also, well, thank you very much for your very clear message and contributions. It's the start of our meeting. I would also warm welcome our other colleagues from the Parliament, Mr. Stutza is with us today, Mr. Sokol is with us today, Mr. Kartheiser is with us today. So thank you very much for coming, and also Mr. Sorey. Mrs. Sorey, welcome to our event today. Now I would like to give the floor to the President of the ECPP, Mr. Gillespie. May I give you the floor? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, dear members of the European Parliament and colleagues who are here. I am honored to be here and to represent the European Christian Political Party. And I am very thankful to Mr. Reisen for organizing this event and to listen to this important report. The presentation of the annual report of the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination against Christians in Europe is very timely. The latest edition of this annual report, which we have in our hands, unfortunately presents a worsening picture of the situation of Christians in Europe. It's interesting that last week I was in Prague and I attended an international conference, a high-level international conference on religious freedom that was organized under the auspices of the Czech president, Mr. Petr Pavel, and the Alliance of Countries for Religious Freedom were gathered there, and it was also underlined the importance of the religious freedom. So thank you again for organizing this event and for presenting this report. OIDAC identified multiple restrictions on the religious freedom of Christians across Europe. Many were subjected to bans on public prayer and religious manifestation, prosecutions for expressing religious beliefs, infringements on religious autonomy and parental rights, and limitations on conscientious objection. For example, many Christians were criminally charged for displaying Bible verses or even silently praying in so-called buffer zones around abortion facilities. Others were prosecuted for expressing their beliefs pertaining to Christian teachings on sexual ethics. So ECPP stands with the hundreds of millions of persecuted Christians around the world, for those in Europe, as well as for everyone persecuted for his or her beliefs. We especially stand for the right of Christians to worship publicly, wear religious symbols, and teach their children their faith. 10 years ago, I was a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And my first report in the PACE was basically, how to say, motivated by your report, by OIDAC report. At that time, Gudrun Krugler, I think, was the director, and she motivated me to start this report in the Council of Europe. And when I started, the name of the report is Tackling Intolerance and Discrimination in Europe with a special focus on Christians. Many people in the Council of Europe thought, well, we can speak about religious freedom or persecution outside Europe, not in Europe. But in fact, the reality is very sad. We have a lot of problems inside Europe. So I think that report that was adopted 10 years ago is relevant today. I talked with Mr. David Skinner. He believes that we need another report after 10 years. Maybe you'll help us to prepare another report. But in that report, for instance, or for the example, I insisted on reasonable accommodation, and also, which was a very important, I think, amendment or article in the report, to enable Christians to fully participate in public life. To enable Christians to fully participate in public life, which I think is very, very important right for us. So I think today, when we are here, it's important once again to realize the importance to defend religious freedom across Europe, but also worldwide. So thank you once again for preparing this report, and thank you for you attending this event. So may God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerio, for your clear message and your opening remarks. Now we will move on to our speaker, Anja Tan-Hofman. I introduced you already in my opening remarks. You are director of OIDAC Europe, and it's really great to have you here. We are here to listen to you. You can tell us something about, well, your findings. You will present your report, the most recent report about the situation last year. So may I give you the floor to present your report?
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and thank you for, especially to the Intergroup for Religious Freedom, those MEPs who are present here, and also those who didn't make it today, and others who joined us, for their unwavering commitment in this field. It's very impressive what's been done in the European Parliament in the past year already on this front, and I'm very happy we can join hands in this effort. Also, many thanks to the ECPP for their support in hosting this meeting, and for all of you joining us here. I think some have traveled to be with us today, so we're really looking forward also to your contributions. Around 1 year ago, the European Parliament held a debate on the rise of religious intolerance. It was a plenary debate, and some of the MEPs already then raised this issue of church vandalism and the rise of anti-Christian hate crimes. And since then, the concerns have been growing and have been reiterated. And before the last elections, the European churches sent a letter, an open letter, saying that they noticed that a proportion of citizens who are Christians feel increasingly marginalized. And they say they do not have the opportunity to express their positions and opinions in an autonomous and distinct way. So today, I'm very happy we can use this opportunity to look at these two phenomena together. On the one hand, anti-Christian hate crime, and on the other hand, the more subtle forms of discrimination and marginalization in society that also really needs our answers. And I hope that some of the data and insight I can provide through the research of my organization can help to have this debate on a really good factual basis. My organization, the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe, it's a long and descriptive title, already telling you what we do, has been doing this work for 15 years. And I'm very happy to today present the most recent findings of our annual report of the last year. In 2024, which is the reporting period for hate crimes in our last report, we recorded across Europe more than 2,200 anti-Christian hate crimes. And among those were also 274 personal attacks, which is a number that rose significantly from around 230 last year. The overall number seems to be slightly less than last year, where we had around 2,400 attacks. However, this is mainly due to the fact that the English police statistics excluded London this year and just dropped for that reason, because we don't have that data. But in the absence of a comprehensive statistic in Europe, my organization tries to combine police statistics, government statistics, but also civil society data to present a picture as complete as possible as we can get in Europe in terms of anti-Christian hate crime. And it's a challenge because it was mentioned before, there's not really anyone monitoring this across Europe from a government perspective or from EU side. The countries which were most affected in the last year where France, the UK, Germany, and Spain, Austria is also on the list, but particularly because it has a very detailed police statistics, more than other countries. But you can see the comparison also here with civil society data. However, these numbers are very conservative estimation. Our total number of 2,200 acts is a combination, as I said, of police and civil society data. We always take for each country the data that is more accurate, but we're trying to avoid double counting. So we go either with the police statistics or with the civil society data. That means in the end, we do have a very conservative estimation. Another reason why I'm saying this is because other surveys and reports show how high the underreporting currently is in Europe. And I want to just mention one study that I think exemplifies this, and I also brought this study if anyone is interested taking it home. In Poland, an Institute for Statistics for the Catholic Church did a survey among Catholic priests. And, you know, Poland is a Catholic majority country, so you would expect that there's no discrimination, but they shockingly found that almost half of Polish priests said that they had experienced aggression in the past 12 months. And then what is more to that is that when asked whether they reported it to the police, more than 80% of them said they did not report the incidences to the police because they thought it's not important enough what happened to them. And this really shows us that if you think of the number of priests in Poland, it would be 30,000 altogether. Like we have, if those incidents were recorded, we would have much higher numbers across Europe. So this is why the numbers only give you really a glimpse of what's happening. And I think it's really important to also look at the concrete incidents and look at the quality of these acts. So a few examples just to know what we're talking about. Numbers always just give you one side of the story. But I would like to just mention a few things from the reporting period of 2024. A few examples that stood out to me was that in November last year, in Spain, a 76-year-old monk was killed and some others injured during an attack on a monastery. And in January, there was an ISIS-related attack on a church. During Sunday Mass, a man was shot dead there. And then in September of the same year, of course, the church of Saint-Omer in France almost burned to the ground in an arson attack that has since been confirmed. Unfortunately, the violence did not stop in 2025. Also this year, we recorded several incidences. Among those, very recently, just one I would like to mention because it really goes to heart, was the murder of Ashur Sarnaya, a Syrian Christian who had fled persecution from Iraq and came to France to seek refuge there, and then was brutally murdered while he was live streaming his religious testimony on social media in an attack that authorities have since confirmed as a jihadist attack. Also, vandalism seems to be a growing problem also into 2025. We've just had a very recent public statement from the German Bishops' Conference that said increasing vandalism of churches, such as arson attacks in sanctuaries, excrements in confessionals, and even the beheading of religious statues in churches, were a sign that all taboos have been broken, apparently, when it comes to the vandalism of churches. So much for the bad news. We were trying to talk about what can we do about it. And we were mentioning that unfortunately at EU level, there's no coordinator currently to tackle these issues. However, I would like to mention one tool to you that I'm really hoping to bring to the attention of many, because I believe it is a very useful one. The Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe has just released a guideline on how to combat anti-Christian hate crimes. And as you can see here, it is a real book. So it's the first time that an international institution has treated the issue in such detail. And it does contain recommendations to participating states, obviously overlapping with EU member states. So I encourage everyone to use this in bringing this to attention to the respective governments. And what is interesting, besides tackling the security issues of Christians in this guideline, it also addresses the underlying causes. And it tries to see what is behind. So, for example, it emphasizes that religious-based hate crimes are downplayed often, underreported, but also politically overlooked. And it says that anti-Christian hate crimes do not take place in a vacuum, but that political discourses and narratives can perpetuate anti-Christian bias and stereotypes. And the organization also calls to responsibility public figures, media representatives, and they make sure that your language does not actually reinforce anti-Christian biases in a biased way of reporting or talking about Christians. So that's very interesting, I think very useful. Also the recommendations, such as really promptly condemning anti-Christian hate crime, to commission studies, to promote education among police officers and government officials, and to implement trainings for them as well. So I think all of this can really be used in communication with the respective governments. We mentioned before that anti-Christian hate crime and discrimination in Europe is growing, and this side of discrimination is something that's oftentimes overlooked. Hate crime numbers are easier to communicate, but I would also like now the last minutes of this presentation to quickly highlight just a few examples of what we see happening also in the legal sphere in respect to religious freedom restrictions. And it is of course, we talk about religious freedom, the human right of religious freedom, which covers a broad range of provisions because you're allowed to practice your religion in public, in community with others. All these things are protected by human rights law, but not always respected by member states. So just to give a few examples, we saw instances of radical secularism trying to push religion out of the public sphere. For example, in France, a teacher was sanctioned last year by a court for using a text of Saint Bernadette in a local cultural heritage class, teaching a language. The text was obviously written in that language, but the court said he was breaking neutrality laws. And then, of course, religious autonomy rights remain an issue where religious groups are not allowed to practice their faith according to their own beliefs and convictions. And for example, in Spain, there was a court that ruled against a male-only religious brotherhood for not admitting a woman as a member. Or in Switzerland, the Court of Lausanne banned a Catholic girls' school from receiving public funding, arguing that it would practice discrimination by being a Catholic school reserved for girls, even if the religious classes were not compulsory. In the area of parental rights, it was briefly mentioned, we had a case where a court, also a Spanish court, banned a father from reading the Bible to his own son and taking him to church in a dispute case between the secular mother and the father. And it claimed that this was religious indoctrination and granted the secular mother the exclusive responsibility for the upbringing of the son in the religious matters. There were also, it was also mentioned already, restrictions on expressing religious views in public. And of course, very significantly, several individuals were prosecuted, fined under so-called buffer zone legislation for peacefully holding signs with Bible verses, or even for silently praying. And even if outside the European Union, I have to mention this case from the United Kingdom, where a British court recently condemned Adam Smith Connor, a veteran, for silently praying in his own mind by just simply standing there. And the court argued that because his head was slightly bowed, this would amount to a sign of disagreement, which is outlawed in this zone, and actually condemned him for his silent prayer. And then, of course, very prominently in Finland, a case now at the Supreme Court, Päivi Räsänen, who is facing prosecution for alleged hate speech after tweeting a Bible verse back in 2019, where she criticized or questioned her own church's support of the Pride events in the city. So many of these cases highlight a pattern, which is that Christians are facing sanction or even legal prosecution for publicly, but even peacefully, expressing their beliefs in regard to traditional Christian worldviews or teachings on moral issues or on human nature. Many times, in the end, the courts uphold these rights, and a court in the UK just confirmed in a case where a teacher was dismissed that views such as opposition to transgenderism or gender fluidity or the redefinition of marriage are protected legal beliefs. However, these court rulings often come after years of legal proceedings, which in themselves are already a punishment for those who are being prosecuted. And of course, it's a minority that is really affected by these kind of court cases, but a lot of other Christians are affected by the feeling of not being able to express themselves and by feeling marginalized. And in Germany, very representative for this, there was a representative opinion poll in the general population asking people, how widespread do you think are hostilities towards Christians in the German society? And it's really remarkable that in the general, like not Christians, but just the general German population, more than 36% said they think it's a widespread phenomenon, that this hostility against Christians. However, in the younger generations, below 30, it was almost 50% who believed the same thing. So we can see this negative trend towards increasing hostility in the societies. And we already mentioned it has consequences. One of them is the increasing self-censorship among Christians, just not feeling if you're expressing your views, your beliefs, you might have negative consequences, and it might really affect your career at university, but also obviously as a politician or in any public office. And this is why we believe there's really a broader societal problem. It's also exemplified here, just this one graph I would like to share with you about general freedom of expression in German society. As we're just talking about Germany. And it's quite drastic, I think quite shocking. It shows you how many people said that they feel free to express their views in public and how many said it's better to be careful. And as you can guess, unfortunately, the blue line is those who said it's better to be careful. And for the first time in 2023, since the 1950s, when this was first, this index was first started, more Germans said, I do not feel free to state my opinions in public, opposed to those who feel free. And this self-censorship particularly affects Christians, which we also confirmed in a number of studies, among which also, just to mention this maybe as an encouragement, there was one documentary we did with young students from across Europe who came together and shared about their experiences of self-censoring at their universities, but also started encouraging each other. And you can, if you're interested to using this resource, very happy if you want to just look it up on our YouTube channel or scan the code here. And it was encouraging that at the end, they came to the conclusion and said, oh, we just became aware of how much we're censoring our opinion, our faith in the university, in a public setting, but we do want to change it and we believe a free dialogue is possible. So I thank you very much for your attention, for really bringing this to the forefront and being able to discuss this here. If you would like to look into our report more closely, I have a few copies here. And of course, please do just go to our website or scan the QR code here for a free PDF download. And I'm very excited that we will hopefully still have time to discuss these things in some more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tang, for your presentation. There are really worrying trends you are presenting. You presented just to us, talking about the figures, and you also underlined, I think, that a lot of, let's say, of the official figures are really underestimated. We are talking about rising violence, but you also underlined in your presentation, it's also a matter of more and more, let's say, legal restrictions. So it has, let's say, different dimensions. It's really important to be aware of that. Before we are going to listen to our next speaker, now we can take some questions from the members of the parliament, and then we will move to our next speaker, and then we can have Q&A also with MEPs and other participants. But now I will start with some questions from our colleagues. Mr. Sokol.
Thank you very much. Thank you for presenting the report. Unfortunately, I have to leave shortly, but I just have one question. Do you have the data about the source of these attacks? So my impression is always that the big majority comes from Islamist background, and a significant part also from the leftist anti-Christian background. But I'm curious if you have more concrete data about the percentages, numbers, or something like that. So where does it actually come from, all of these attacks and all of this hatred? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. So it is a bit of a tricky issue because unfortunately, of course, the majority of anti-Christian hate crimes in Europe are attacks on churches. We have also attacks on individuals, but the majority is still vandalism, arson attacks. And in most cases, the perpetrators are never caught. So, of course, sometimes they leave behind messages. And as you said, we do have instances where Islamic graffiti is like a whole cemetery in France was defaced with inscriptions, submit to Islam, etc. So there are instances like that that stand out and then show that there is this source. We also mentioned the fate of some converts to Christianity from a Muslim background, which in some regions, of course, face increasing pressure, which is also highlighted in this OSCE guideline as one group that needs to have more protection. And as you mentioned, some countries, I'm thinking of Spain or Italy or any country, but some countries that stand out particularly that there's a political dimension as well, and that sometimes the far left with radical positions, anti-clerical positions, does also initiate attacks on churches. However, you always have to make the disclaimer that in the majority we don't know, and which really shows us that we need more research on this. And it needs to be taken seriously as a phenomenon in order even to get to that question of where we can identify. Of those cases where we identified perpetrators, we outlined in our report the percentages, and there was, as you mentioned, there was Islamic attacks and Islamist-inspired attacks, attacks from far-left groups, also some of far-right groups that were most frequent here.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Christian Terrace?
Thank you. The question is about genderism. We had last week in the mini plenary here in Brussels, a vote on a report on gender agenda. And it's mind-boggling the way the language is rephrased. So from your perspective, how is this affecting the religious rights and the basic fundamental rights? Because if a man who pretends to be a woman is considered to be a woman and should benefit from the rights of a biological woman, the whole legal framework is changing. The second issue is in regards to the fundamental rights to abortion. If we consider that the right to an abortion is a fundamental right, in other words, taking a life of an innocent person, of an unborn child, is a fundamental right, could that principle also be applied at the end of someone's life or towards the end of someone's life? So is the right to life a fundamental right, or is the right to take someone else's life the fundamental right? Right? Which is it, and what is your perspective on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's touching upon really this question of root causes. Maybe to say it in a very brief manner, I believe there's a post-Christian ethic in our society, which is looking at the colleague here who's been in a panel with me last week and said that, so I'm copying now. But I think it's a good summary. It's a post-Christian ethics that really places the free will of the individual without any restraints as the center of human rights, which is not how the Human Rights Declaration was drafted. It was understood as dignity as the source. Now we have this idea that the independent free will is the source of all rights, and this clashes, of course, with traditional Christian ethics. And in that sense, without going into the details of each of these questions, I think it can really lead to restrictions on religious freedom. As, for example, like in the UK, just a lot of Christian hospices said they have to close down because they're not willing to end someone's life. And there's no conscientious objection provided in the new law on assisted suicide. And so it really marginalizes those Christian groups or individuals who stick to the Christian ethics on placing dignity at the center and the dignity of everyone, and then coming into this so-called human rights conflict, because with this redefinition of some rights, with this free will at the center of everything, I think we do see this clash of worldview, which is at the heart of many of the restrictions. But thank you for the excellent question.
Thank you very much. Somebody else? Yes, Mr. Sturza.
Thank you. So, as you know, Christians are facing very serious persecutions around the world, everywhere around the world. Over 7,600 churches and Christian properties have been attacked. But the situation in the European Union is also complicated for churches. And my question is very shortly, is there any follow-up for the police files regarding the burning of churches in Eastern Europe?
So just to make sure, you mean at the level of police, of the recording, and then what happens with this data in the Eastern European countries?
So yeah, my question is just regarding the fact that, as we all know, a lot of churches in Western Europe, basically in France, but not only, has been burned because of human facts. So the idea is to know if the police file, someone is following the police files and regarding these facts.
So across Europe, there's some member states who actually do a good job in recording these instances by making a differentiation. When the police records an incident, they ask, is there bias? Is there motivation? An anti-Christian, anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic, whatever. However, especially in Eastern Europe, many states don't really do that very much in detail. For example, just to mention one case in Poland, I mentioned a study about the priests earlier, right? So like 50% maybe of clergy experience aggression. A lot of civil society cases covered almost 80 attacks. And the Polish government reported one anti-Christian hate crime to the OSCE this year, which really shows a complete, like, either political unwillingness or blindness about the necessity to record this. So I think there's huge gaps we still need to fill. And with our report, of course, we try to, by complementing civil society data and police data and putting them really next to each other, we try to highlight in which countries it's not enough that's being done. And we also try to look at, the different forms. We also cover, for example, the occupied territories in Ukraine in our report, and we look at all these different regions to give a clear picture of what's happening.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your very clear answers. I would like to propose to move on to the next part of our session. That means that I would like to give the floor to Mr. Alexandro Calcagno, legal advisor of the Commission of Bishops' Conferences of the European Union. I introduced you already in my opening remarks, so really great to see you here. Welcome, warm welcome. And I would like to give the floor to you well, to share your views with us about this important topic. First, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Honorable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's a great honor for me to be here to highlight some of the work COMECE does on this topic. COMECE is the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the European Union. I am particularly thankful to the Intergroup on FORB and also to OIDAC and ECPP for involving COMECE in this very important event. Speaking of OIDAC, before I go into the points I would like to raise, I cannot highlight enough how highly we appreciate the work done by OIDAC, not only because it helps raise awareness about this very sensitive and serious phenomenon, and also to counter underreporting, as we heard, but also because it provides the ground for solid policy making, including at the European Union level. Now, as COMECE's representative here today, I would like to briefly refer to some of the points we highlight when it comes to working on this legal area. I will start from the most important one. It has already been mentioned by other speakers today. We have strongly advocated for the appointment of an EU coordinator to counter anti-Christian hatred in the EU. And we would like to see the EU embrace this phenomenon in a more convinced way. And we think that one of the concrete steps which can be taken in this sense, one of the most important ones, is to appoint such a coordinator. Of course, we acknowledge and we do not question the specificity of the situation of Muslim and Jewish communities who can already rely on such a coordinator at the EU level. But at the same time, more and more reports are emerging. It's now clear that we need a coordinator also for this area. This leads me also to commend the work done at the OSCE level with the guidance Anya already mentioned on understanding anti-Christian hate crimes. This guidance highlights once again, the fact that ignoring this phenomenon is not an option anymore, including at the EU level. And we would like to see this guidance maybe pave the way for initiatives also at the EU level. For COMESA, it's important that means of protection are provided to the faithful and for sacred places of different religious denominations, regardless of whether they belong to a minority or to a majority denomination. We also see the risk of the fact that maybe a lack of concrete action by the EU on this topic might even be instrumentalized to create anti-EU narratives. This is also a danger which we see. And another point which is important for us is to keep a strict distinction and a clear, to prevent any confusion between the EU coordinator on one side and the special envoy on FORB outside the EU. They both need adequate resources and also to be placed in a position to exploit their full potential. So this is another important point for us. The issue of appointing an EU coordinator is raised by COMESA in different settings. We did it with Commissioner Brunner at the plenary assembly of COMESA in October. We did it yesterday at the high-level meeting between the EU and religious leaders, and we will continue to do so in partnership with other organizations. A second point connected to this one, which is also very important for us, is to see the EU doing more and better on when it comes to access to EU funds. We have seen this year, I believe, a case of a call for funding under the SURF program, referring to equality, to fighting discrimination, intolerance, mentioning Muslim communities, Jewish communities, not Christian communities. I think there was also a parliamentary question by MEP in Salvini, if I'm not mistaken. We noticed again in the Agora EU proposal made by the Commission this year that there is this omission. Christians are not mentioned. And we believe it's really important that this omission is finally removed, and we count on the support of all the MEPs present today to do that. As I said yesterday, the European Commission held an annual high-level meeting with religious leaders, and our representative, Bishop Kozon from Denmark, I will quote him, referred to the fact that there is more than one singular reason for the present situation of many Christians of experiencing discrimination, exclusion, harassment, hatred, and violence. One reason is to a large extent the most extreme form of secularization of society, in the sense that there is not supposed to be any room for religion in public space or religious argumentation in politics and public debate. Many challenges and limitations for Christians in modern societies derive from policies characterized, if not by sheer hostility, at least by ignorance and lack of comprehension, both for the positive role of religion in society and the basic need for individuals to live according to their beliefs and the right to have it secured and protected by civil legislation. Now, this leads me to another point which is very important for COMESA, and it is about the sound protection of religious symbols in the public square. We think that when religious symbols, but also signs, messages, and expressions are seen as potentially offensive, either to the convictions of other believers or of non-believers, or are depicted as possible means of pressures on others, then acts of intolerance and hatred find a more fertile ground, including against Christians. This also applies to the area of employment and occupation, where religion cannot be seen something that can be left outside the door. Unfortunately, even at the EU court level, we had the risk of having this expression being taken on board. Also, there are legislative initiatives at the national level who go so far in strictly curbing freedom of religion that they can also create an atmosphere of suspicion, negative bias towards religion, including Christians. So we also see a link between a strong or weak protection of freedom of religion inside the EU and prevention or not of hatred, discrimination, and intolerance. Terminology is also important. When we speak of tolerance, intolerance, we have to remember that tolerance cannot be a surrogate for protecting freedom of religion inside the EU. Well, I already hinted before to this very important point of protecting regardless of being part of majority or minorities. We think that when certain religious groups are protected, whereas others are neglected or even perceive a lesser protection, almost as if they were a legitimate target, then there is the risk of a great imbalance in the fundamental rights domain. I already hinted at ignorance and lack of knowledge before. Religious literacy is one of the high priorities for COMECE, including within public authorities, because that's the precondition for having solid policy making. And we think that religious illiteracy and ignorance of religion can foster acts of hatred. I will conclude by referring to the issue of protection of places of worship, which, as Anya mentioned, is one of the key issues in this domain. COMECE has been very active during the last few years on this topic. We have cooperated with different EU-funded consortia. We have become recently part of a European database of experts and stakeholders on this matter under the PARTESCOM project. We took part last week in a consultation done by the Shielded project, also on protection of places of worship. So we are very active on this. A more general point we always raise is the idea of linking better protection of places of worship and protection of freedom of religion inside the EU. At the EU level, we often see protection of places of worship rather linked with their symbolic nature. They're in the European landscape. Of course, security reasons and symbolic value have also their relevance. But places of worship are the place where primarily freedom of religion is exercised concretely by the believers. So we really think that there should be a change of focus at the EU level. And we also think that there should be a focus which goes beyond acts of terrorism, but covering all acts, vandalism, violence, profanations, and all the other horrible instances which Anya has mentioned. I will conclude also because my voice is leaving me, but I would like to encourage the EU institutions and particularly the MEPs who are present here today to take the next step from a political point of view, because data are there, statistics are there. I don't think it's an issue anymore of proving that we need something, but it's an issue. It's a point of really finding the courage, I would say, to take the next step. And thank you again to OIDAC for greatly contributing to maybe to this goal being achieved in the short term, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Calpagno, for your contribution. It is very clear listening to you that freedom of religion or belief is not only outside Europe under pressure, but also in Europe. It's really good to hear how active you are in, let's say, the contact with the European Parliament, but also with all other institutions, as the commissioner who is responsible for it. So that's activities we really appreciate that. And I can only underline what you said. It's time now to act. We have to take political responsibility and to do something. And maybe we can also use, let's say, the last 30 minutes to think about what can we do? What measures can we take? Now I can open the floor for, let's say, more Q&As. Now, Q's, and the answers are coming from you. I open the floor for questions. I'm looking around. Do you have questions? Please raise your hand, mention your name and organization, and may I give you the floor?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Reichensen. Marcela Szymanski from Aid to the Church in Need, Pontifical Foundation, with a report on religious freedom in the world, and we also cooperate with OIDAC very much for the information that is pertaining to Europe. Wanted to observe something, an angle that we should not lose sight of here in this intergroup and in this house, is that from our experience in Aid to the Church in Need with our bi-yearly report on religious freedom in 196 countries, we observed that the Global South, as it is called now, the Global South autocrats are copying the West in the intolerance towards Christians. Only last week, there was by miracle one law withdrawn from the Mexican Congress, where they would have voted a complete banishment of priests from the internet, only priests. So it's a highly discriminatory law, and it was just by really through miracle that it was withdrawn. But we know that they are going to come back. Also, I wanted to point out that when there are discussions of Islamophobia here in this house and in the parliaments in Europe, we are precluding the analysis and the listening to the facts of Islamic attacks in places like Nigeria. Because if we are saying here that there is Islamophobic tendencies in the EU, we are not going to be willing to hear the attacks that were clearly perpetrated by Islamic forces elsewhere. So we have already had that problem in the United Kingdom, which is not a member of the European Union, but we can see it coming here if we continue just fanning the flame of the word Islamophobia. We have to be very careful with that. And also, under the pretext of freedom of individuals, as Anya was saying, individuals, the free will of the individual is now the center. Under the pretext of respecting the freedom of the individual, the states have declined the responsibility as signatories of the UN Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. So this pretext of I'm respecting the freedom of the people have made that most European countries are in violation of their international engagements. I wanted to have your opinion and also of the other member present, if there's an action envisaged or we can help you working on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anja, may I ask you to respond? Sandra?
Yes, I can only underline what Ms. Szymanski just said, and we really appreciate the work of ACN in this whole field. And I do believe it's so important because it's connected, obviously, like the things happening here in the West, the laws that are being made. It's been underlined by several human rights organizations that the way hate speech is being criminalized here does remind of some legislation in countries that are outlawing blasphemy, because it's becoming such a narrow definition, or rather such a broad definition with covering almost anything, that people get into this legal insecurity of what they say could be regarded. So I think there's a lot of connection, and we really have to pay attention to this. That's just what I want to highlight, to this interrelatedness, and also to how we can help with what is happening in the global south. But many thanks. Also, I just recommend the report that ACN has just published about religious freedom around the world, covering all religious groups and all across the globe. It's really an amazing piece of summary of what's going on.
Thanks a lot. Do you like to add something? No? Somebody else, other questions? Over, I see, well, three people. I'll start with Peter, and then you're, I probably remember your name. Sorry? Wolfgang, yeah. Okay. Peter, you first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anja, in the first place, also for the invitation, Bert-Jan, and for the report, Anja, that you shared with us this morning. My name is Peter Moens, and we are together representing the European Alliance for Christian Education, new foundation since this year. And I'm really shocked by the numbers and the report that you shared with us this morning, actually. And I was thinking about, so it's a question not only for you, but also for Bert-Jan and maybe also for Mr. Gillespie and other MEPs. I was thinking, what does this mean when this is the atmosphere, the European atmosphere that you described to us, this new atmosphere, the post-Christian ethics, where we're talking about? What does this mean for the next generation? What will this mean for our sons and the daughters in the future? And my question to you is, based on the report that you shared with us this morning, and thinking about that this development will go on, and of course I see there is a task for the European Parliament about a coordinator, that's correct, but there is also a task for Christian education. And can you explain to me a little bit more how you see, from your vision, from your background, what kind of task there is for the Christian schools in Europe?
Thank you. Would you like to respond, or? Yeah. Well, you can go first. Or?
Well,
I can say a few words, yes. Well, thank you very much for your question. I think it's a very important question. What shall we do and how can we improve the situation? From a Christian worldview, can say that life is a fight. So then we will continue to fight. We'll fight for religious freedom. We'll fight from different, let's say, angles, from political, legislative, but also education is very, very important. So I'm very glad that in Netherlands you have this pillar of Christian education. We don't have this pillar in other European countries, but I think it is important. When I was a member of the Moldovan parliament, I insisted that we introduced in our school curriculum, the subject related to Christian education. So that I think is important to raise the new generation with a very important understanding and awareness what religious freedom is, how to respect somebody else's freedom and so on. So I think, again, you made a very good point that for members of European Parliament and national parliaments need to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can only underline what you said, Anita, especially also here to underline, it's really important to underline the importance of Christian education. It's a fact that also Christian education is more and more under pressure. What kind of freedom do we have indeed in the near future? In 10 years, do we have then the freedom to tell and to teach our children about what's a family life in Christian perspective? Do we have the freedom? I have really concerned about that, to be honest. On the other hand, you also see in the parliament politicians who are aware about what is happening. So you see also conservative politicians becoming more and more active in order to stop that, let's say, very concerning development. So we are not without hope. Next speaker.
Thank you, Bert-Jan, and thank you especially, Anja, for your valuable work and that of your organization. If you all have been shocked or even wondering about the figures about Germany, while we are representing our European Association and Alliance for Christian Education, I'm the Secretary General of the German Free Protestant Schools as well, and I'm living in Germany. I can only assure you that those figures and developments are correctly attributed. Is it a fact? Just yesterday it came to my knowledge from a leader of a big Free Protestant church in northern Germany that the regional government in his county has published a paper on integration in public schools, labeling believing Christians as extremists. Now, Anja, with your experience, how would you formulate an ideal response to such an official publication?
Yes, unfortunately, we've had similar reports from Austria. There's a report on right-wing extremism, and in the last one, there was a chapter naming Christian politicians, not even from a right-wing party, just because they stand for traditional Christian worldview and value, democratically elected, and just the fact that this is possible to give this branding to believe in Christian, I think it's highly concerning. But it's also something that can be refuted. And I think people are becoming increasingly aware of how some of these stereotypes are really unfairly, or stereotypes of names that are really wrongly attributed. And I think when we call that out, people are able to see it. We wrote an official reply to this, and it's really been taken up. So what I usually say is, okay, if a religious, like let's say a synagogue is attacked by an extremist, we rightly call that person so. But how on earth do you make the conclusion that somebody who believes that human beings are made as female and male in the image of God for each other is on the same, is on pars with this, not calling to violence and actually standing for what has built up our society for the last millennia. So I think it's very clear it's becoming increasingly clear to many people that this is not right, and naming that and trying to find the right words and trying to find also the media outlets that would be taking this up to give a response, I think can be very fruitful. And especially in Germany, people are starting to see this increasingly, I believe. And maybe just to underline also your work, thank you for the Christian schools. We have a chapter about parental rights, specifically mentioning Christian schools, and we're really seeing there's pressure, but also the amazing work you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would like to add, speaking about parental rights, I mentioned that 10 years ago, I had a resolution, present a resolution in the Parliamentary Assembly Council of Europe. 2 years later, which means 8 years ago, I presented another resolution, the rights of parents to raise their children in accordance to their religious and philosophical conviction. That resolution, again, it was a very, I don't have time to tell you how difficult it was to, approve that resolution. And there was a very strong resistance from the left, but the resolution was adopted, which is a fundamental right of every parent to raise his or her children in accordance to the religious and philosophical convictions. And there is such European resolution and even recommendation of the Council of Europe for all European countries.
Thanks for that. We see a lot. I have long list now. I will start with the two in the back, and then Nigel, I shall also you. And so what I would like to propose to collect, maybe we can collect 2 questions, and then we go back to Anja and Alessandro. And
my name is Konstantinos Kenanidis. I'm the Secretary General of the Orthodox Church in EU. And thank you for the report. I think in reality it's much more shocking. And on education, because I'm also director of the Theological Institute here in Brussels to train theologians that they teach the course of religion in Belgian schools, in French speaking. But I'm also still 13 years now in the framework of European schools. And we just heard about this resolution. And I can tell you, sir, that your resolution is under attack the last 3 years in the House, because there is a working group made with not having knowledge at all of the religious leaders were not informed at all. And they decided to wipe out the last 2 years of religion education in all European schools. They didn't succeed yet, but they're trying, and I think they will do it in the end. And the point is that we try to prepare the children in the last 2 years to learn about other religions, to understand deeply what means this famous vivre ensemble. And they will take this out of us. And the last year is, as they had all the knowledge from the previous years, we're about to discuss ethics. I mean, the most important things about their lives when they leave the school. About peace, about violence, about human sexuality, all these important topics. And then we'll take these out and they will introduce multi-religious Macedonian Salat. They don't know who will teach, which is the curriculum and so on. And the second point is that about protecting the premises of churches. Last Sunday, it was the feast of Orthodox Cathedral of Belgium, here in Gare du Midi, Avenue Stalingrad. So in the middle of the service, a man came in the middle of the church and starting to shout Allahu Akbar. And the church was full of people. And like the Archbishop of Belgium was there. But the point is that nothing will happen, And I'm talking, just 2 kilometers from here. Thank you.
Please report the case to us. Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Sabina Gonzalez. I work here at the Chapel for Europe, just down the street. And following with that idea, on the 27th of this month of November, we are organizing an event on the future of religious education in the European schools. Why? Because the Chapel for Europe, COMECE, and all the other religious representatives, we are very worried about this change that is going to happen in the European schools. This change is undergoing. I mean, there is a reform in order to give like a better level of education for students at the European schools, but the body who decides which would be that reform thinks that religious education has nothing to do with it. And not only Christian education, we mean all the different religious traditions that are taught in the European schools. So on the 27th, you are all invited to come. We are going to take the central body who takes this decision, the parents who are concerned, who will put questions to the central body who takes that decisions, and also different religions leaders to also make questions how this could be possible. And I'm talking not about all European schools around Europe. So we are not talking about a small number of students. And I think this is very critical. This is totally freedom of religion or belief. And it's, as my friend said, in-house.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. The very concerning development and example of that they are all everywhere trying to let's say exclude religious, to put it to let's say to the private area, and not in the schools anymore, not in the public anymore. That's very concerning development indeed. I really would like to urge you when you take the floor, please concentrate on specific questions in order to have also interaction with our speakers instead of only, let's say, sharing statements. We appreciate the statements, but I think it's good for our debate to have really specific, concrete questions. But next is over. May I ask you to give your...
Yes, thank you, David Skinner from Sweden, the Office for Christian Rights. My question is how we can raise awareness of the growing problem with mandated shunning. The Jehovah's Witnesses are very much aware of this. Many religious minorities, mostly Christian, of course, are worried about the campaign by ex-members who link up with anti-cult groups, academia, and they're beginning to influence governments to interfere with church discipline, which of course is also a freedom under Article 9. So this is part of what Anya calls a increasing feeling of Christians being marginalized. It's not hard evidence like vandalism or church burning or throwing things at churches, but it's a real threat that we see is going to get worse. Look at what's happening in Norway and in Belgium here, and in Sweden, my home country. They're already threatening to take away funding of religious minorities. Kamisi, our member there, he referred to religious minorities as well as majorities, the Catholic Church. There's a lot of minorities who are the bedrock of European society contributed, and we're worried about this. I'd be glad to get some insights from Anya and maybe Valerio. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, maybe that's a good suggestion. You can take another question, and then we come back.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation of the report, Anya, and also to my colleague Alessandro José Luis Bazán from Commerce as well. It was mentioned by Marcela Szymanski about the need to connect also and give context worldwide. I would like to bring the issue of the non-EU Western countries, that some of them have similar problems, but even they go beyond. For example, the question of institutional consensus objection, not only the individual. We have Catholic hospitals in the United States with that problem. The question of the seal of confession and the mandatory report in case a priest suspects that there is sexual abuse. The question of conversion therapy. We have in Spain, for example, a proposal of law by the socialist communist government, just also criminalizing even parents that oppose or do not consent. But there are many other issues. For example, in the UK, we saw the so-called non-crime hate incident. So we see that the current situation in Europe could be worsened by this trend. So my question is, how can we combine and how can we, let's say, make efforts together, the EU, but also other authorities in other countries or organizations, to combat a trend which is a trend in Europe, but it's also a trend in other non-EU Western countries?
Thank you very much for both questions. And for the sake of time to put it together, I think it's good. Firstly, yes, I think the example that was given is very striking. Religious minorities, especially Jehovah's Witnesses, but others as well, are in the OSCE region one of the groups really most affected by violence. And apart from really brutal persecution in Russia, the reports that are available about that, it's very shocking also in the OSCE region. And I really want to highlight again this wonderful guideline that really, I think, underlines this problem and calls states to action to make sure not only to prevent this violence, but also not to discriminate on a legal basis. And the cases from Norway, Czech Republic, Sweden, and so on, I think are very striking in this regard, how far kind of you can go with trying to defund. And I think they've been successfully, most of them, challenged. Jose Luis from Cometse, thank you also for raising all these important areas. Most of them we did mention in the report, the situation in Spain, where pastoral care really is affected by legislation that says only affirmative treatment in anything related to gender identity, sexual orientation, etc., is permitted. That leads to a situation where someone has to define what is affirmative. And of course, if that means that a young girl who thinks she's now a boy, minor, can by her parents not be counseled anymore that she should be reconciled with her identity or like receive treatment that helps her to embrace her identity as a girl and like her body, then I think this is a severe problem. And that's one of the areas we're highlighting, because you're mentioning also the US and the situation with religious liberty in the sense of religious autonomy rights. There's, of course, now the newly established Religious Liberty Commission, and I was able to meet with one of the representatives this summer, and they underlined the issue with the seal of confession being questioned now at state level. But I think this group is really taking this up as one of their main concerns. I think there's good hopes that there is awareness raising about this on a very high level. And of course, I mean, the question what we can do about it, I think it's really more for our honorable MEPs here, how to coordinate our efforts better. I think that's really one of the main issues. We see all these things happening in countries across Europe, and we're all concerned. And there needs to be, of course, coordination of an awareness raising of why these certain legislation unduly restricts religious freedom and how to counter them. I think that's very important.
Thank you. Yeah, I have some suggestions for that, but I will come back on that in my, let's say, concluding remarks, because I think it's important to end also, let's say, to conclude our conference with some, let's say, concrete actions. Alessandro, you would like to add something?
Yes, just very, very briefly to react to some of the interventions. Sorry, again, for my voice. Well, on the role of education, by listening to some of the questions, I also thought of what education can do to stimulate critical thinking, which is very important to counter hatred in society, and also religious literacy. I was mentioning before, I think this we also have to consider. One of the persons who asked questions referred to living together, and this reminded me of something which Chief Rabbi Gigi said yesterday at a high-level meeting with religious leaders. He said, well, living together, yes, but we have to go beyond that. It's not sufficient anymore. We have to build together. Living together is not sufficient anymore from his perspective. And I think I would agree with what he said. And finally, I think one of the interventions referred, although not explicitly, to the institutional dimension of freedom of religion. Again, I can only agree with the concerns. At our Legal Affairs Commission, we treat often with this topic. And interference with the internal organization of religions and of churches is one of the main concerns for EU-based Catholic bishops' conferences.
Thank you very much. I have to be honest, closed as a list, but I saw Nigel, you raised your hand, so and you, I will give you both, let's say, the opportunity to raise a question, but please keep it short clear, concrete, and then we are trying, let's say, to go to our conclusions, and also to manage a bit the time. You would also like to raise, I didn't mention it yet, but during the meeting, Margarita Lapisa also arrived, one of our important colleagues. Really appreciated Margarita. So, if you also like to, as MEP, you have also the opportunity, if you have an additional remarks or suggestion or question, feel free. But we start with the last two questions. Nigel, I start with you.
Thank you, Bert-Jan. I'm Nigel Goodrich, General Secretary of the Brussels-based International Movement for Peace and Coexistence and a former school teacher of religious education for 32 years in the UK. I have a question. Given that we've heard about direct attacks on Christians and Christianity from rising secularism, and I have to say the Red-Green Alliance of the extreme left and Islamism, we must not forget that, there's also subtle oppression of Christians, is there not, in the media and in school materials, through the absence of Christian history, the absence of Christian ethics, the absence of Christian heritage, and so on. So the question is, against what standards will we be able to compare what is being taught in the media, presented in schools? Against what standards can we compare that to show that it's falling short and therefore contributing to anti-Christian prejudice?
Thank you. Shall I also take the last question?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your work. And as a French, I'm very concerned by, of course, the problem of religious freedom in Europe. I just want to mention briefly, because I heard about minority faith, and I belong myself to minority faith. And what happens around the world affects Europe, and Europe affects the East as well. In particularly today, in Japan, Korea, which are democratic nations, there's an extremely strong threat to religious freedom of dissolving a religious organization like ours. Our founder is in jail in Korea for 50 days already, an 80-year-old woman. And all of this, of course, has political motivation. And when Jehovah's Witnesses are attacked in Norway, this justifies attacks in Japan and Korea, and vice versa. And the religious freedom, the religious freedom special rapporteurs of the United Nations have already denounced this. But I think I want to draw your attention about what's happening also in other parts of the world. Particularly, it's not well known, but what's happening in Japan and Korea today. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Yeah, indeed, it's really important to realize that we already mentioned before. We are not just talking about, let's say, freedom of religion of belief, which is under pressure in the EU, but also outside the EU. And generally speaking, I say that quite often in our intergroup, we are mainly focusing on what is happening in other countries. And today we are mainly focusing about the EU, but it's really important to see both dimensions. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Would you like to respond? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Maybe one concluding remark to what has just been mentioned about the question, what standards are we measuring media reporting or the materials in education to? Indeed, I think these are all areas that are now very contested. But I would kind of like to give the question back to all of us. What are we contributing to changing this? I just had a discussion with the main Austrian media outlet for 2 months until they published my article about anti-Christian narratives in the media. And they finally did, but it was not only the work of writing it, but then of kind of reminding them week by week that they promised to publish something. So all of this, of course, it takes our effort and time and it's tiresome, but I think if we all want to shape the public debate and bring back those content that legitimately has to be there. And I think journalists as well as other representatives will acknowledge that it's a legitimate concern that should be raised publicly, but they would not be very, sometimes, just not be very keen on or very proactive on doing that. So I think the job is a little bit on us. And the same for the question, who is writing the school books? Who is sitting on these educational committees who are deciding about the content, what is being taught in history classes? I mean, it's now, in Austria, we have a history book that does not mention certain areas almost that happen in history. And you wonder who is deciding what goes into that book and what doesn't. And of course, there is a committee behind that in the Department of Education of the of the government. And I think a question to all of us, are we proactive in that area? Do we encourage others to go into these places, to bring into that legitimately those content that we currently see lacking?
Thank you very much. Valerio?
Well, if we are at concluding remarks, I would like to make several remarks. I heard the voices that are a bit worried about the future of Christians and Christianity in Europe. The Prime Minister of the Republic of Moldova, of my country, is today in Brussels. We flew together yesterday to Brussels, and he is here because Moldova wants to join the European Union. But I have to tell you that in Moldova, and likewise in Ukraine, there are also, how to say, worries, especially given the war, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and that is used in a way that each time you speak about Christian values, you are with Mr. Putin. So this is a kind of like dilemma we have in Moldova and Ukraine. And I think it's important for Western Europe, and I'm glad that we have here members of the European Parliament from Western countries that are defending religious freedom and are defending the right of Christians to be active in public life. I think this is very important. I'm aware that it's not easy. With my almost 14 years experience of being a parliamentarian, I already mentioned life is a fight. So I think Mr. Constantinos said that my resolution is under attack. Well, I am aware of this, but we in a way are under constant attack, and we need to counterattack. So we need to be active. We need to be, thank you, be active. And this activism must be seen, you know, through initiatives in the European Parliament, in the Council of Europe. When it's good to defend religious freedom, but it's also important to promote our rights and fundamental freedoms. So this is where I would encourage our MEPs today to be more active and maybe to initiate a resolution in the European Parliament that will show both to the West and the East that this is a very important fundamental right, and we are going to promote it and we're going to stick with it. So may God bless Europe and the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I are going to, let's say, to conclude our event, I would like to mention that Mrs. Antonella Sperna, the Vice President of the Parliament, responsible for Article 17. Article 17 is the article about the dialogue with churches and so on. She planned also to be with us today, but unfortunately, due to the flight or some delay, she was not able to participate. But she sent me some her greetings to us, and I would like to share with you her, let's say, concluding remarks. So Mrs. Sperna, she would like to share with us the following conclusion. She said to us, let us work together to ensure that freedom of religion and belief is not just a principle on paper, but a reality in every member state and beyond. By monitoring legislation, fostering inclusive and free public debate, and protecting religious communities and their members, including Christians, from intolerance and discrimination. So to conclude, I would like to thank you once again for your kind invitation. That's what she said to us. May our discussions today help translate our shared values into concrete steps. I wish you all a fruitful continuation of your work, and I look forward to seeing how this momentum will be carried forward. That are the words of our Vice President of the Parliament. So from my side, thank you all for your excellent speeches and your contributions and valuable discussions. I would like to close this conference with some last remarks. First, as Intergroup for freedom of religion and belief, we have already asked Commissioner Brunner and President von der Leyen to appoint a coordinator on attacks and discrimination against Christians. And we will reiterate this call and keep pushing for this. And I can imagine that I can get the support of you all for that. Yes. Yeah. So we really need a special envoy for freedom of religion and belief outside of Europe, but we also really need to have a coordinator responsible for freedom of religion and belief in Europe. That's the idea. Our second point, we will also ask Commissioner Brunner to ask the EU member states to collect data on anti-Christian hatred and attacks. As Anja Tuin-Hofman pointed out, not all member states collect data. Many incidents remain unregistered. So we see the data is really underestimated. So there's another point we will stress in our communication with Commissioner Brunner. A request to collect that data. Our third point, we also need funding for programs to combat anti-Christian hatred and attacks in Europe. We have such programs for combating anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred. We need this directed as combating anti-Christian hatred as well, in our opinion. So funding for programs to combat anti-Christian hatreds. And to conclude, I think it's also high time that we ask our European Fundamental Rights Agency why they are not reporting on this. They have reports on what is like to be what's like to be a Muslim in Europe today, for example, and they report also about anti-Semitism, and that's good, but nothing about Christians. So there's also a request we will send to the European Fundamental Rights Agency. So thank you all again. I would like to ask you to stay a bit longer as we have some coffee and cake for here today. Time for some network activities. Thanks again, and let's work together on this. They need to wake up. Yeah. Watchdog needs to wake up.
Those you could give that to Mr. Oh no, he's gone. He's gone. Yeah, yeah. I'll give this to Bert Young.
What about